began on a night when the world felt strangely tilted. Not in any way you could measure, but in that quiet way you sometimes feel when the air is heavier, when your thoughts walk slower. There are nights when even the smallest sound seems to carry a secret, and this was one of them. The garage light buzzed faintly. The tools slept where they had been left, and in the far corner there was a door Rick hadn't meant to build. We care about you, you know. Truly, whoever you are, wherever you're listening from. Maybe you're curled up under a blanket. Maybe you're lying back in a chair with the night breathing softly at your window. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee and let's get started. It wasn't a grand, imposing door, just an uneven wooden frame set into a wall that hadn't been there last week. No hinges Rick could recall installing, no knob. Just a faint shimmer at the edges as though the air around it had been holding its breath for a very long time. Rick had been repairing a plasma coil when he first noticed it. He stared for a long moment, head tilted, his mind tracing through his own inventions like flipping through the pages of an old notebook. No, this wasn't his. Or if it was from a version of him he no longer remembered being. He didn't open it that night. Instead, he poured himself a drink, leaned back in the squeaking chair, and simply watched it. The strange thing about the door was not its sudden appearance. Rick had seen stranger. The strange thing was the feeling it gave him, that rare, unsettling sensation of being the one who was awaited, not the one doing the searching. Morty came in halfway through the night, hair messy, clutching a blanket around his shoulders. "What's that?" he mumbled. Rick didn't answer. He just nodded toward the couch and handed Morty a wrench, not to fix anything, but to give his hands something to do while they waited. They didn't speak much. The hum of the garage filled the space between them. It would be months before Rick stepped through the door. But that first night was important. It was the night he learned that not all openings are meant to be rushed into. Some wait for you to be ready. Some impossibly seem to know the exact shape of the moment when you'll finally reach for them. And so the door stayed, watching, waiting, breathing in its own quiet way. Rick never told anyone that the door had a sound, not a creak or a rattle, nothing so ordinary. It was softer, more elusive, like the hum of a refrigerator heard from 3 rooms away, or the whisper of an old song you almost remember but can't quite place. It came in short intervals, sometimes faint, sometimes so clear it made him pause mid-sip. A single tone, low and warm, hanging in the air just long enough to make him turn his head. It wasn't the sound of danger. Rick had lived his life surrounded by alarms and explosions, and this wasn't either. This was almost kind. One evening, weeks after the door appeared, Rick sat at his workbench with an unfinished gadget in his hands, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. The sound had been steady all day, like a heartbeat under the floor. It made him think of something he'd heard once long ago, though the memory refused to come into focus. Morty noticed too. "It's weird," he said one afternoon, holding a screwdriver and pretending to help. It feels like it's coming from everywhere, but also nowhere." Rick didn't respond right away. He rarely did when Morty stumbled onto something true. Instead, he just grunted, twisted a bolt tighter than it needed to be, and reached for a different tool. But his eyes had that far-off flicker, the kind Morty had learned to recognize, the look Rick got when the past was creeping up on him. Late that night, after Morty had gone to bed and the house had grown still, Rick found himself standing close to the door. The sound was there again, wrapping around him like a memory he could almost touch. For a moment he closed his eyes and let it settle into him, and then, without knowing why, he whispered back. Just a single word, meant for no one else to hear. The sound didn't change, but somehow Rick felt that it had listened. It was a Tuesday when Morty asked the question. Not that the day mattered. In the Smith household, Tuesdays didn't feel much different from Thursdays. But Rick remembered it, because the sun had been spilling into the garage in that washed-out way, softening even the sharp edges of the tools. Morty was sitting cross-legged on the workbench, eating half of a sandwich he'd found in the fridge. The smell of solder drifted in the air, mingling with the faint metallic tang of portal residue. Rick was bent over a small device, tightening a row of screws that didn't need tightening. Morty swallowed, wiped his hands on his hoodie, and asked, Do you ever think the portal might, be waiting for you? Like, not just there to go through, but actually waiting? Rick didn't look up right away. His hand paused on the screwdriver, but his eyes stayed on the metal, as if the right angle might hide the weight of the question. Morty continued, quieter now. I mean, maybe it's not about where it goes, but about when. Like, maybe it only works when you're ready for whatever's on the other side. The room seemed to breathe after he said it. The hum of the garage filled the silence, but in that silence the door's strange tone, the one only they seemed to notice, pulsed once, almost like an answer. Rick finally looked at him. His expression wasn't the sharp, dismissive smirk Morty was used to. It was softer, though still unreadable. He took a sip from his flask, then set it down carefully. "Morty," he said, "there's a lot of things in the universe that look like they're waiting for you. Most of the time, they're just there. It's you who decides what to do about it." Morty nodded slowly as if he understood. But the truth was, he didn't. Not yet. Still, the question had been asked, and Rick knew some questions didn't go away. They just lingered, finding a place to rest until the day they were finally answered. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Rick found himself replaying Morty's words. He stood near the door again, listening for the sound. It came, low and steady, like a quiet tide. And for the first time, Rick wondered if Morty might be right. Rick found it by accident, which was fitting. Things worth finding often showed up that way, tucked behind other things, waiting for the right moment to be noticed. He had been searching for a pack of quantum fuses in the back of the garage, shifting through dusty boxes and piles of wires that hadn't been touched in years. His hand brushed against something smooth and flat, wedged between a crate of rusted parts and an old folded tarp. When he pulled it out, a thin cloud of dust swirled up into the warm, still air. The notebook was small, bound in cracked leather that had once been red, but had long since faded to the colour of dry leaves. Its pages were uneven, some warped from what looked like coffee spills, others torn at the edges. There were faint scorch marks on the back cover, a familiar kind of damage. Rick didn't remember leaving it there. That was strange. He knew his own handwriting when he saw it, but the sketches inside were younger somehow, not just in the lines, but in the way they leaned forward on the page, full of motion and possibility. One page showed a crude drawing of a portal frame, almost identical to the one in the garage now, except it was surrounded by little notes scrawled in the margins. Not formulas, not technical specs, just short sentences, half-formed thoughts. "If I ever find it, I hope I'm ready." Some doors open both ways. What if it's not a place, but a person? Rick ran his thumb along the ink, as if the texture might give away something the words couldn't. He didn't notice Morty watching from the doorway until the boy spoke. "What is it?" Morty asked. Rick closed the notebook slowly, holding it in one hand like something fragile. "Just old work," he said, his voice low. But that wasn't the truth. This wasn't just work. This was a map of thoughts from a version of himself who had believed in things he'd long since learned to question. A version of himself who had been looking for something, and perhaps, quietly, still was. That night, Rick placed the notebook on the bench beside the door. He didn't open it again, but he found himself glancing at it more often than he meant to, as if, one day soon, it might decide to open itself. Beth hadn't thought about that dream in years, the one from when she was little. But one, slow. Sunday morning, when the house was still half asleep, it came back to her without warning. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of tea, staring out the window at the pale light pooling over the lawn. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. And then she remembered. In the dream she was very small, standing in a field where the grass bent gently in a wind she couldn't feel. There was no sky, just a soft glow above, as if the light was coming from everywhere at once. She heard humming, low, steady, almost like a lullaby without words. She couldn't see where it came from, but she knew it was close. And for reasons she couldn't explain, it made her feel safe. When she told Rick about the dream as a child, he hadn't said much, just patted her on the head and muttered something about brain static before returning to his work. But now, sitting in the quiet kitchen all these years later, Beth realized something she hadn't then. The humming in her dream had sounded exactly like Rick's voice when he thought no one was listening. She carried the mug into the garage without thinking. Rick was at his bench, turning a spanner in his hands but not really using it. She stood there for a moment before speaking. "Dad, do you remember when I was little and I told you about that dream?" Rick didn't look up. "Kid, you've told me about a lot of dreams." "This one had humming, the same sound that—" She hesitated, then changed her words. "The same sound I think I've heard in here lately." Rick's hand stilled, just for a second. Then he set the spanner down, very slowly, and reached for his flask. "Dreams are just the brain cleaning house, Beth. Don't read too much into them." But Beth saw it. The flicker in his eyes, the way they drifted toward the far corner of the garage where the door waited. She didn't press him. Instead, she left the garage, the soft echo of that childhood hum following her back into the kitchen. Rick sat there for a long time after she'd gone, the air heavy with that same quiet tone. And though he would never admit it, he found himself humming again. The door hadn't changed. That was the strangest thing about it. Rick was used to the universe moving, expanding, collapsing, glitching, burning, reassembling in new configurations. But the door remained exactly as it had been from the first night. Plain frame, no handle, edges faintly shimmering like a reflection you couldn't quite trust. Weeks passed. Dust settled on the shelves. Seasons shifted outside. The door waited. It didn't lean toward them or call them closer. It didn't flash or hum any louder when they passed. It simply stayed. A constant in a room full of restless machines. Sometimes Rick ignored it for days, throwing himself into projects with the kind of precision that was really just distraction in disguise. But then there would be nights when he found himself sitting across from it with a drink in hand, staring at the shimmer until it blurred into something like water. Morty noticed. "You ever think it's, like, alive?" he asked one evening, half whispering as if the door might overhear. Rick smirked without humour. "Everything's alive if you zoom in enough. Doesn't make it your friend." But he didn't dismiss the idea entirely, because there was something in the way the door seemed to be aware without moving, a kind of patience that wasn't empty. One night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Rick stood in front of it for a long time, close enough that the shimmer brushed the edge of his vision. He didn't touch it. He didn't speak. He just stood there until he realized he was matching his breathing to its faint, unchanging pulse. It felt less like an object and more like a listener. And Rick, without knowing why, felt a flicker of guilt, as though he'd been keeping it waiting too long. It happened without ceremony. Rick hadn't planned to step through that night. There was no grand experiment, no careful preparation, no crowd of curious eyes. It was late, the air thick with the smell of metal and rain, and the garage felt like it had been holding its breath for too long. He'd been sitting at the bench staring at the old notebook when the hum began again, that low, steady tone the door made when it wanted to be noticed. He looked up. The shimmer at the edges seemed warmer somehow, like the last light of a long sunset. Rick stood. The flask was still in his hand, but he didn't take another sip. He crossed the room in 3 unhurried steps, and before he could think of a reason not to, he leaned forward into the shimmer. The first thing he noticed was the absence. No air moving against his skin. No sound except his own breathing. The space on the other side was vast, but not empty. It was full in a way he couldn't measure. The ground beneath him was smooth, neither cold nor warm, reflecting just enough of his shape to remind him he was here. Above, if there was an above, there was no sky. Instead, a soft, endless glow surrounded everything, not casting shadows but holding every detail in gentle clarity. He checked his wristwatch out of habit. The hands were frozen. He tapped the glass. Nothing. He checked again after what felt like several minutes. Still frozen. A memory stirred. Beth's dream, the field without wind, the light without a source. And for a moment, Rick thought he could hear the faintest trace of humming. He didn't go far. Not yet. Just a slow walk forward, the sound of his footsteps muffled as though the ground was listening. And then, with no change in the air, he turned back and stepped through the door into the garage. Everything there was exactly as he had left it, except his watch, which was ticking again, but a minute slower than before. The second time Rick stepped through, he didn't wander. He walked straight ahead, as if the first visit had left a faint path for him to follow, not one he could see, but one he could feel under his feet. The light was the same, soft, directionless, holding everything in a gentle glow. The ground rose slowly beneath him until it became a hill, its slope gradual enough to make him forget he was climbing. When he reached the top, someone was already there. The man was sitting cross-legged, hands resting on his knees, eyes half closed. He looked neither young nor old. His face had the kind of calm that made age feel irrelevant. His clothes were simple, almost worn to the point of invisibility, as if they belonged to the place itself. Rick stopped a few steps away. Didn't think this place came with locals. The man opened his eyes, not startled, not surprised. "You took your time," Rick frowned. "We met before?" The man shook his head. "Not in the way you're thinking." They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them carrying that faint hum. Rick noticed the man's breathing matched it perfectly. "Do you live here?" Rick asked. The man's gaze drifted toward the endless glow around them. "I wait here." "For what?" The man's answer came without hesitation. "For the one who built the door." Rick almost laughed, but the sound caught in his throat. He felt the weight of the old notebook in his jacket pocket, though he hadn't brought it. "Guess you've been waiting a while," Rick said. The man gave a small nod, as if that was the entire point. Neither of them spoke again. They simply stood there, looking out into the light, until Rick finally turned and walked back down the hill. When he glanced over his shoulder, the man was gone. The next day, Rick found himself in the kitchen, staring at a sandwich he hadn't made. It wasn't anything remarkable at first glance. 2 slices of bread, some cheese, a little lettuce tucked between. But the moment he took a bite, he realized something impossible. It didn't get smaller. No matter how much he ate, the sandwich remained exactly the same. Morty walked in, rubbing his eyes. Dad? What are you—" Rick held up a hand. "Don't. Just watch." He took another bite, slow this time, tasting the cheese and bread as if it were the first sandwich he'd ever had. The bite disappeared into him, and yet the sandwich stayed whole. Rick blinked. He felt a strange calm settle over him, the kind of calm that doesn't need explanation. Morty, curious despite himself, took a piece. Same result. The sandwich remained infinite, untouched by hunger or time. Rick leaned back in the chair, chewing slowly, savoring the rhythm of it. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the universe gives you small things that don't need fixing." Morty looked at him, frowning in that way only teenagers can, half skepticism, half wonder. "So, it's magic?" Rick smiled, not the usual smirk, but a quiet, almost tired smile. "Call it whatever you want. Just notice it. Some things are meant to be experienced, not solved." They ate together in silence, each bite stretching into eternity. Outside, the sun climbed slowly, shadows shifting over the garage floor, but inside, time felt like it had loosened its grip, leaving only the soft hum of ordinary wonder. And for a moment, the portal, the notebook, the hill with the waiting man, everything faded into the gentle rhythm of a sandwich that never ended. Rick had always thought he knew light. Fluorescent bulbs, plasma bursts, the harsh glare of distant suns through telescopes. But none of that compared to the sky he saw that evening beyond the portal. He stepped through cautiously, expecting the familiar absence of gravity and sound. But here, light moved, not like rays or beams, but like water, flowing in gentle currents across the vast horizon. Each glow seemed to pulse, carrying a memory, a fragment of something he couldn't name. Morty followed behind, his eyes wide. It's beautiful." Rick didn't answer. Words felt too small for this place. He stretched a hand toward the light, and it parted around him, like the sky recognized him. Somewhere above, a faint hum whispered, familiar, warm, almost like the lullaby Beth had remembered in her dream. Rick felt it resonate deep in his chest, and for a moment he let himself forget the weight of worlds, equations, and timelines. This is different from anything I've ever seen," Morty said, his voice low. "Different is quiet sometimes," Rick replied. He paused, letting the words hang. It's not always loud or dangerous. Some things are quiet and still, and they matter more than we notice. They walked beneath the flowing light, each step soft, unhurried. Rick realized the shimmer of the portal, the waiting man, the notebook. Everything had led here, to this place of gentle awe. Morty glanced up, tracing the moving stars with his finger. Do you think anyone else knows about this? Rick shook his head slowly. Maybe. Maybe not. Doesn't matter. The point is, we're here now. That's enough. And in that silence, the sky seemed to lean closer, as if listening, as if it had been waiting all along for someone to notice its quiet grandeur. Morty had never been very good at sitting still. His mind always ran ahead, chasing questions, chasing explosions, chasing the next thing that might matter. But somewhere in the glow of the 1,000 suns, he began to notice a different rhythm, one that didn't demand rushing. He watched Rick more closely than he ever had before, not for science or schematics, but for the quiet moments. The way his father's hands hovered over a panel without touching it, the soft exhale after a hum of thought, the way he sometimes hummed without realizing it. "Dad," Morty whispered one evening, their feet barely making a sound on the luminous ground. "Why do you do all this stuff alone?" Rick paused. The hum of the sky seemed to settle around him. "Alone?" he echoed. "I'm not alone, Morty. I'm just focused. But there's something about noticing, really noticing, that changes everything." Morty frowned. "Noticing what?" Rick tilted his head, eyes reflecting the flowing light above. "The small stuff, the things that don't shout, the things that wait for you to see them." For a long moment, Morty stayed silent. He listened to the soft currents of light, to the faint hum that had begun following him, like a friend he hadn't known he had. He felt the patience of the world, the same patience that had waited at the door, at the hill, in the sandwich that never ended. And slowly he realized that listening wasn't just about hearing, it was about understanding without needing a reason. He looked at Rick, who was still standing beneath the gentle, endless glow, and for the first time, Morty felt the full weight of that quiet wisdom. Not loud, not flashy, but steady, alive. Morty nodded once. "Okay," he said softly. I think I get it now." Rick smiled faintly, not a grin, not a joke, just the kind of small acknowledgement that means more than words. And together they walked, listening to the sky, to each other, to the hum of a universe that had always been waiting for someone to pay attention. Rick and Morty hadn't intended to follow anything. They simply walked, letting the soft currents of the glowing sky guide them. Yet the further they went, the more the world seemed to respond. Small breezes, faint tremors, and the gentle hum of the light above converged into patterns that Rick could almost, but not entirely, read. It wasn't a map in the way Morty expected. There were no lines or symbols or directions printed on parchment. Instead, the guide was made of whispers, tiny, fleeting sounds that brushed past the ear like wind in a field, like the faint echo of a voice that belonged just out of reach. "Do you hear that?" Morty asked, squinting as if the whispers might appear in the air before him. Rick nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's the map." "The map?" Morty repeated, uncertain. "Every place worth going leaves a trail," Rick said quietly. "Not on paper, not in stars, in moments, in breaths, in whispers. You follow it by listening." Morty tilted his head, trying to catch a pattern. Some whispers were melodic, some just fragments of words he couldn't fully understand. They were patient, weaving in and out of the gentle glow, leading them through valleys of soft light, over hills that rippled like liquid glass. For a long time, neither spoke. The whispers moved with them, subtle but constant, guiding without coercion. Morty began to notice details he'd never paid attention to before. The way the glow shifted with their steps, the faint vibration beneath their feet, the quiet pulse that seemed to match their own breathing. Rick glanced at him, eyes calm but alert. "You're learning," he said. "Not how to read maps, how to hear them. That's the real skill." Morty nodded again, feeling a deep, unexpected sense of trust. The whispers didn't belong to Rick. They didn't belong to him. They belonged to the world, patient, quiet, waiting, and for the first time he understood what it meant to follow without needing to arrive. And somewhere in the soft currents of the light, the hum of the portal, the faint memory of a lullaby, and the whispers all intertwined, reminding them that guidance often comes in shapes too gentle to grasp, but just persistent enough to lead you home. Rick didn't know how long they had walked. Time in this place felt optional, as though the minutes and hours had decided to drift elsewhere. And that was when he realized something. Some places were designed not to be remembered. The universe around them seemed hollow in parts, vast stretches of light and shadow that carried no sound, no scent, no warmth. Memories they thought they had of those spaces didn't belong here. Faces blurred, names faded. Even the soft hum that had guided them now seemed muted, as if waiting politely for them to notice its absence. Morty shivered. "It's kind of sad, isn't it?" Rick didn't answer immediately. He let his eyes sweep the horizon, the glow of forgotten suns casting soft reflections across the ground. "It's not sad," he said finally. "It's just selective. Some things get remembered, some things don't. And maybe the ones that aren't remembered are still part of the rhythm, just in a way we don't see." Morty nodded slowly. "So it's like the universe. Forgets things, but not really." "Exactly," Rick said, a hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "It just moves on quietly, leaves space for the new stuff to grow, leaves room for us." They walked on in silence, feeling the emptiness not as loss but as a kind of pause, a breath held so that what mattered could settle. The glow above stretched infinitely, neither bright nor dim, and in that gentle light, even forgetting felt like a gift. Somewhere ahead, the faint whisper of movement returned, soft and patient. The universe had chosen to forget, yes, but it had not chosen to abandon them. And in that subtle, quiet truth, Rick and Morty found a fleeting, almost imperceptible peace. The kind that doesn't announce itself, but hums softly in the heart if you take the time to listen. It wasn't the kind of laugh you heard every day, not the boisterous, "I just built a doomsday device" kind of laugh. It was quiet, low, and fleeting, the kind that slips out when you least expect it, almost afraid someone might notice. Rick had been tinkering with a strange gadget that emitted tiny pulses of light, each one corresponding to a memory. Morty leaned over his shoulder, watching the patterns flicker. "Dad, is it broken?" Morty asked. Rick shook his head. "Not broken, just playful, I guess." And then it happened. A soft chuckle escaped him, carried on the gentle hum of the glowing sky around them. Morty blinked. He had never heard that sound from Rick before. It was warm, not mocking, not sarcastic, pure in a way that made the edges of the world feel softer. "Did you just laugh?" Morty whispered. Rick shrugged, almost embarrassed. "Guess I did. Sometimes it's just the universe being ridiculous, and sometimes I let myself notice it." The light from the sky shifted subtly, as though responding to the sound. Small pulses of colour danced along the edges of the world, echoing the warmth in Rick's chest. Morty smiled, and for a moment it felt as though the two of them, father and son, wanderers in a world of infinite light, were the only ones who existed. The hum, the whispers, the soft currents of glowing energy all seemed to pause just long enough for the sound to linger, stretching the moment into something almost eternal. Rick's laugh faded, leaving only the echo, but the memory of it remained. Morty knew he would carry that sound with him always, a small, quiet reminder that even the most guarded souls could open, ever so slightly, to the gentle rhythm of joy. Rick held the tiny screw between his fingers, turning it slowly as if it contained the weight of the universe. To anyone else it would have been nothing, a small, cold piece of metal easily lost on a workbench. But here, in this quiet, timeless place, it mattered. Morty leaned closer. "It's just a screw, Dad." Rick didn't answer at first. He rolled it between his fingers, feeling the ridges press into his skin. "Just a screw," he murmured, "but even the smallest things hold the potential to change everything. A bolt here, a connection there. The tiniest shift can ripple outward." Morty nodded slowly, though he wasn't entirely sure he understood. He watched as Rick placed the screw carefully on the edge of the bench, aligning it with an old gadget that had long since stopped working. "Everything," Rick said quietly, "even the things you think are small, wants to be noticed. Wants to be held just right." The light in the room shifted as if affirming him, soft shadows stretching across the workbench, highlighting the screw like a tiny sun. Morty realized then that patience mattered as much as knowledge. The care in turning a single screw could be the difference between chaos and quiet order. Rick glanced at him. "Remember that, Morty. It's not always the explosions or the inventions that matter most. Sometimes it's this, the quiet acts, the small choices, the things you put your attention on." Morty studied the screw, the way it caught the glow of the room. In that small object, he could see the weight of intention, the echo of care, the rhythm of a universe that noticed the little things. And for a brief moment, father and son shared a quiet understanding that even the smallest weight could carry immeasurable meaning if only you took the time to feel it. Rick didn't know how he found it. The light shimmered in familiar patterns, the hum pulsed beneath his feet, and yet somehow he stepped into a place that felt entirely new. The garden was quiet, not the kind of silence that presses on your ears, but a gentle hush that held its breath, waiting for someone to notice. Trees stretched high, their branches bending not toward the sun but toward each other, forming delicate arches of soft, glimmering leaves. Flowers opened slowly, one petal at a time, as though time itself had softened to match their pace. Morty followed, stepping carefully over roots that seemed to hum faintly underfoot. "Is this real?" he asked, voice low. Rick didn't answer immediately. He reached out to touch a leaf, and it bent without resistance, quivering slightly under his fingers. "Real enough," he said finally. "Some places exist to remind you. Patience isn't passive. Waiting can be active. Waiting can teach." A soft wind stirred, carrying a faint fragrance that made memories surface unbidden. Childhood mornings, a lullaby long forgotten, the hum of a door that waited patiently for its visitor. Morty inhaled deeply, letting the scent linger, as if it were a lesson in itself. Rick knelt beside a small patch of glowing moss. He pressed a fingertip to it, and the light pulsed gently in response. "Everything here is listening," he murmured. "Waiting isn't about nothing happening. It's about everything happening slowly, giving you time to notice it." Morty smiled faintly. I like it here." Rick's eyes softened. "Most things worth knowing are subtle, Morty. This garden, it's teaching us without rushing us. Just showing up, being aware, that's enough." They walked side by side, the hum rising and falling like a heartbeat, the soft arches of trees guiding them further. In that gentle space there were no doors, no deadlines, no equations, only the quiet rhythm of waiting and the unspoken lesson that the world sometimes unfolds best when you let it. Rick and Morty had been walking through the garden for what felt like hours, yet time seemed to stretch and fold around them, as though the world itself was humming a lullaby. A faint sound drifted through the trees, soft, unformed, yet strangely familiar. Morty tilted his head, listening. "Do you hear that?" Rick nodded, though he didn't move his lips. "It's an echo, or maybe a memory. Sometimes the universe remembers things we've forgotten. Sometimes it hums them back to us." The sound grew slightly, threads of melody weaving through the air. It was not a song you could sing, not words you could repeat. Only the gentle cadence of care, of voices that had once comforted, now flowing quietly through the space. Morty closed his eyes. He remembered bedtime as a small child, the sound of soft voices reading, stories, the comfort of blankets, the warmth of someone watching over him. The echo of that feeling now surrounded him, not just in sound, but in the gentle glow of the garden, the soft bending of the leaves, the slow pulse of the ground beneath his feet. Rick's voice broke the quiet, low and contemplative. Memory isn't always about remembering the past. Sometimes it's about letting the past breathe around you, letting it remind you that small kindnesses, quiet moments, they linger longer than you think. Morty opened his eyes, and for a moment he saw the world differently. The glowing trees, the humming ground, the invisible threads of sound. It all felt alive, patient, protective. They walked in silence, letting the lullaby guide them, each note a soft touch against the edges of thought, each echo a quiet promise that even in a vast, strange universe, care could exist, subtle and unwavering. And as they moved, Morty realized that the world was full of soft wonders, waiting not for him to chase, but for him simply to listen. Rick and Morty came upon it unexpectedly, a bridge delicate and narrow spanning a quiet chasm that seemed to stretch endlessly. Shadows pooled beneath its edges, not dark or menacing, but soft, like the folds of a blanket waiting to be smoothed. Morty hesitated at the entrance. "Do we have to cross it?" Rick studied the bridge for a long moment, the hum of the garden fading behind them. "No," he said finally, "but sometimes you go because the path itself teaches more than the destination." They stepped forward, the wooden planks beneath their feet surprisingly warm, humming faintly with each careful step. Morty felt the shadows shift gently, rising to meet their presence without threatening, as if the world was reminding them that not all darkness demanded fear. Rick glanced sideways at him. "See, Morty, the shadows aren't empty, they're part of the rhythm. You step lightly, you notice them, and suddenly they're guiding you, not holding you back." Morty nodded, breathing slowly, feeling a calm he hadn't known he could carry. The air smelled faintly of rain and earth, soft and grounding. He realized that every shadow along the bridge felt like a memory, a whisper of things that had been, quietly making way for what could be. Rick didn't speak again, just walked beside him, steady and unhurried. Morty followed, noticing the subtle movements, the sway of the bridge, the shimmer in the shadows, the pulse beneath their feet. Each step became part of the lesson. Presence, attention, care. When they reached the other side, the bridge seemed almost to dissolve behind them, leaving only the faint memory of its gentle hum. Morty felt a strange satisfaction, the kind that comes not from achievement, but from understanding, from seeing the quiet logic in things that once seemed opaque. And Rick, glancing back over his shoulder, allowed himself a soft exhale, knowing that the shadows, the light, the bridge itself, it had all been part of a lesson too subtle to name aloud. Rick and Morty arrived at the river without noticing when it began. The water was clear, yet not ordinary. It seemed to carry a soft glow beneath its surface, as if each ripple held a tiny fragment of light from somewhere far away. Morty crouched to touch it. "It's warm," he said softly, "like it remembers things." Rick nodded, letting his fingers brush the surface. The water flowed steadily, carrying reflections of trees, sky, and the faint shimmer of the glowing garden behind them. "That's because it does," he murmured. "Everything here remembers, not just people or places, moments, feelings, the small things you think are gone. They linger in the current, waiting for someone to notice." Morty smiled faintly, watching a leaf float past, carried by the gentle flow. "So, it's like the river knows us?" Rick's gaze followed the same leaf. "Not just us. It knows everything that touched it, everything it touched. And somehow, it holds it all without complaint, quietly, patiently." They walked along the bank, stepping slowly on stones that glimmered like fragments of starlight. Morty realized that each ripple, each soft whisper of water, felt like a conversation with the past. Not words, not explanations, just recognition, a reminder that everything mattered, even if it couldn't be held. Rick stopped and crouched beside him. "Remember, Morty, some things in life aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be felt, watched, understood without needing a reason. The river, it teaches that patience is a form of respect, that presence is a gift." Morty nodded, tracing a finger along the current. The water held their reflections and yet seemed to look beyond them, into something deeper, something infinite. For a moment, father and son were still, just listening, just observing, letting the river carry their thoughts and leave them lighter. And as the gentle flow continued, neither needed to speak. The river remembered, and that was enough. Rick and Morty arrived in a clearing that felt both impossibly vast and intimate at once. Above them, stars hung low, soft and muted, as if the universe had lowered its gaze to meet their eyes. The light wasn't harsh, wasn't dazzling. It whispered instead, a quiet promise of constancy. Morty tilted his head, marvelling. It's, peaceful. Rick nodded, shoulders relaxing in a rare moment of stillness. Yeah, not every star needs to burn bright to be seen. Some exist just to remind you that the dark isn't empty. The garden beneath them glimmered faintly with soft moss, flowers opening slowly as though in acknowledgement of the light above. The air carried a hum, a subtle rhythm, almost like a heartbeat that belonged to the entire clearing. Morty crouched to touch one of the blooms. It feels alive. Rick watched him carefully. Everything is. Sometimes you just need to stop rushing past it to notice. Life isn't only in explosions and discoveries. It's in the quiet glow, the patience, the moments you almost overlook. They walked together under the soft stars, the air thick with gentle calm. Rick's eyes traced the horizon, where the light blurred into shadow, where the garden seemed to pulse with a rhythm he could almost hear. Morty smiled faintly, letting the hush settle over him. I get it now. Some things don't need chasing. They just exist. Rick nodded, a small, approving smile tugging at his lips. Exactly. And sometimes noticing them is enough. They remained in the clearing for a long while, listening to the soft hum, the subtle breathing of the garden, and the gentle glow of the quiet stars above. And for a moment, in that stillness, neither past nor future mattered. Only the soft, unhurried present existed, wrapped around them like a gentle embrace. Rick and Morty walked slowly through a stretch of the garden, where the glow seemed fainter, as though the world had softened its light in respect. In the shadows between the luminous trees, faint whispers stirred, delicate, almost imperceptible, carrying fragments of things lost to time. Morty leaned closer to hear. What? Are those? Rick's eyes traced the edges of the whispers as they floated past. Forgotten things. Not gone, just quiet, waiting for someone to notice them. The whispers were strange, neither words nor sounds, but sensations, a feeling of a long-lost afternoon, a half-remembered song, a smile from someone who had been there once. Morty shivered slightly, but not from fear. It was awe, quiet and gentle, like discovering a secret kept by the world itself. Rick crouched to touch a low-hanging branch, letting it sway in his hands. It's easy to forget, but the world remembers for you. It carries everything, laughter, tears, small kindnesses, little regrets. You don't need to hold it all yourself. Morty nodded slowly. He reached out, letting a whisper brush his fingers, feeling it dissolve into warmth. So, even if we forget, it's still there? Rick smiled faintly, a rare softness in his gaze. Exactly. Some things exist quietly, shaping everything without making a sound. Sometimes noticing them is all the memory they need. They walked in silence for a while, letting the soft hum of the garden mix with the faint whispers. Each step felt deliberate, but not forced. Morty realized that the world was full of these subtle currents, little pieces of time and care that had waited patiently for someone to observe them. And in that gentle moment, Rick and Morty understood. Not every lesson needed words. Not every story needed an ending. Some things simply existed, and noticing them, quietly, was enough. Rick and Morty wandered toward a low-hanging cloud that hovered above the garden, soft and luminescent. It moved with a gentle awareness, shifting like mist caught in a slow, deliberate dance. Morty tilted his head. It feels like it knows me. Rick smiled faintly. Maybe it does. Or maybe it's letting you feel seen. Some things, they don't need eyes or ears to understand you. They just respond. The cloud drifted closer, brushing past them without resistance. A faint warmth radiated from it, and in the hush of the garden, Morty thought he heard something. A whisper, gentle and deliberate, carrying his name without a voice. Rick watched him quietly. Some beings, or places, they remember the ones who notice. It's a kind of acknowledgement, a soft echo that says you exist, and that's enough. Morty reached out a tentative hand, letting his fingers pass through the mist. It felt like silk and sunlight at once, intangible but undeniably present. "It's comforting," he said. Rick nodded. "Not everything in the universe is sharp, loud, or dangerous. Some things are quiet. They wait. They nurture. They remind you that the small moments, the ones you barely see, carry meaning beyond measure." The cloud lingered, drifting slowly above them, its gentle glow reflecting in their eyes. They stood together in silence, feeling its soft pulse like a heartbeat of the world itself. And for a fleeting moment, Morty understood. The universe, in its infinite expanse, could be tender, patient, and aware, just like the people who chose to notice it. And somewhere, amidst the gentle light, the clouds seemed to smile, acknowledging them without words, without demand, just presence. Rick and Morty walked through a quiet clearing where the light seemed to ripple in slow waves, like time itself had softened its pace. The air held a faint hum, subtle and persistent, as though each second remembered everything that had passed before. Morty paused, letting the sound wash over him. "It feels different here, like every moment matters." Rick nodded, watching a soft pulse move through the ground beneath their feet. "Time isn't just counting, it's remembering. It keeps what's important, quietly, without asking for attention. You just stumble into it sometimes." They moved slowly, noticing traces of moments left behind. A leaf caught mid-fall, a shimmer where sunlight once passed, faint echoes of laughter that seemed to stretch across years. Morty felt a gentle tug in his chest, a mix of nostalgia and comfort he couldn't name. Rick crouched beside him, letting a fingertip hover over the ground. "Everything leaves traces. Some we see, some we don't. But they're there, shaping us, teaching us, even when we forget. That's the quiet power of time." Morty looked up at the softly glowing horizon. "So, we're part of it too?" Rick smiled, a quiet, unforced gesture. "Of course. Every choice, every thought, every small act of noticing, it's all woven into the pattern. And sometimes the echoes are more important than the noise." They continued walking, letting the subtle hum of remembered moments guide them. Each step felt deliberate but unhurried, as though the world itself had slowed to let them catch up, to let them see the gentle continuity that bound everything together. And in that serene space, Morty realized that time was not an enemy, not a countdown, but a companion, patient, enduring, and quietly aware of every small heartbeat it carried along its path. Rick and Morty found themselves on a narrow bridge that seemed to stretch between two constellations, the gaps beneath them filled with quiet, shimmering darkness. The stars above reflected in the soft currents beneath their feet, and each step felt like moving through a gentle dream. Morty hesitated, looking over the edge. "It's kind of scary." Rick placed a hand on his shoulder, steady and calm. "It's okay. Sometimes you have to walk between what you know and what you hope for. That's where the real lessons are." They moved slowly, feeling the bridge hum beneath them, each vibration like a pulse connecting them to the stars. The universe seemed to lean closer, patient and quiet, reminding them that even vast distances could be crossed with small, careful steps. Morty glanced up. "Do you think people notice these things?" Rick shook his head softly. "Some do, some don't, but the ones who notice carry them quietly. That's enough. Presence matters more than recognition." The wind carried a faint, warm scent, like distant memories brushing past their faces. Morty breathed it in, feeling the rhythm of the bridge, the hum of stars, and the soft weight of being exactly where he needed to be. Rick's gaze swept the horizon, where the two constellations met. "It's not about the destination," he said, voice gentle. "It's about learning to walk the spaces in between, about understanding that the quiet moments, the small steps, the pauses, the awareness, they shape everything." Morty nodded, letting the lesson settle deep within him. Together, they crossed the bridge in silence, feeling the pulse of the universe beneath their feet, the soft hum of connection surrounding them, and the patient, enduring light of stars guiding every careful step. And when they reached the other side, the bridge seemed to vanish behind them, leaving only the sense of having travelled something vast and important without hurry or fanfare. Rick and Morty stood at the edge of a quiet clearing, where the glow of the garden met the soft expanse of the universe. Above them, stars lingered, gentle and unwavering, and below, the hum of light rippled softly through the ground. Morty took a deep breath. It feels like everything we've been through is here, all at once. Rick nodded, eyes reflecting the soft illumination. Yeah, all the paths we've walked, the bridges, the whispers, the gardens, they're all here, not gone, just folded into the quiet. Moments we didn't always notice. They sat together on a smooth stone, letting the calm stretch around them. The portal, the experiments, the hum of countless worlds. It all seemed distant, softened by the gentle weight of reflection. Morty felt the warmth of presence, of shared understanding, and for the first time he felt the quiet power of stillness. Rick's hand hovered over his knee, hesitating. Then he let it rest, just slightly, a small, unspoken gesture of care. Morty smiled faintly. "You're not always as scary as I thought." Rick chuckled softly, low and rare, letting the sound settle like a gentle ripple in the universe. "And you're not always as lost as you feel. Sometimes noticing is enough. That's the real gift." They sat together, listening to the faint hum of light, the whisper of forgotten things, the pulse of the stars above. The world felt infinite, patient, full of soft lessons waiting to be seen. And in that quiet, Morty understood. The journey was never about chasing. It was about noticing, being present, and letting the small, gentle moments shape the heart. As the glow dimmed to a soft, comforting warmth, Rick and Morty rose. They stretched, feeling the quiet rhythm of the universe echo in their bones. And somewhere in the distance the light lingered, patient and constant, reminding them that presence matters more than everything else. And with that, they stepped into the night, still connected, still listening, still learning,